We are good. Great. Thank you. I don't have a gavel, so I'm calling to order our joint meeting this evening. I want to recognize that I am here with Needham's finest volunteers. I'm grateful to all of you. And just so everybody knows who is here in the room tonight, we have the Select Board, School Committee, Parks and Recreation Committee, Board of Health, the Finance Committee, and the Community Preservation Committee. I'm not going to go around the table and introduce everybody because there's a lot of us, and then we have a lot of interested citizens in the room as well. But we're here tonight to discuss Claxton Field and to understand the situation as it relates to the soils and the investigation that's going on there. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Katie King.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all here tonight. Let me try that. So as the chair mentioned, we're talking about upcoming soil testing at Claxton Field, and I'll start by saying that there'll be a lot of detailed questions that we won't be able to answer because we have not done the testing yet. And so I know there'll be a lot of questions. So you may be wondering, well, why meet now? And I think the goal for tonight is really to make sure we all have the same foundational information, understand kind of what brought us to this point and potential outcomes moving forward, and really so that there's no surprises. And we certainly will answer the questions that we can tonight, and then we'll defer others that we have to for after the soil test results are back. So for the agenda tonight, I'll talk about kind of the history to date. I'll then turn it over to Karis Lustig, our Director of Public Works, to talk about next steps and what the potential outcomes of soil testing could be. Then Stacy Mulroy, our Director of Park and Recreation, will talk about field usage. And we'll then turn it over to Tim McDonald, our Director of Health and Human Services, to talk about public health. We have also with us Chris Heap, our Town Council, for Q&A. And before we dive in, I wonder if we could just we have 3 folks, I believe, from Weston and Sampson, so on Zoom. So if they could introduce themselves. If we could start maybe with Lee.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you all can hear me. My name is Lee Koska. I'm a engineer with Weston and Sampson, and I am joined tonight by Prashanta Bunia, who is an LSP from Weston and Sampson, as well as Marie Rudeman, who is our risk assessor. So happy to assist with any technical questions that may come up as part of the presentations.
So by way of background, hopefully everybody knows Claxton Field is on Central Avenue across from the recycling and transfer station. There's 2 softball fields and an overlapping multi-purpose field there. There are restrooms, a parking lot, trail access, and up until recently, there was a playground as well. The history of the site, it was a former town burn dump. And that was before the town built the RTS. We know that about 60 years ago, fill was brought into the site and placed on top and leveled to create the fields as we know them today. For many years, and many of you have been involved in these discussions, Claxton had been on the list for renovation to provide additional amenities to the user groups, to Needham residents. And in October of 2020, town meeting approved funding to design a renovation of Claxton Field. At that point, the town hired Weston and Sampson to help us on that project to do design, engineering, and environmental services for us. In December of 2021, Weston and Sampson conducted initial soil borings on the site to visually inspect the composition of the soil. And the purpose of that was to inform the design. And really the conclusion of that was that there was grass followed by typical topsoil. At that point, the measurement was between 6 and 12 inches at various points on the site. Below the topsoil, there started to be fields. Intermixed with the fill was ash and waste materials, so kind of debris, shards of ceramic, glass, wood. And then as you got to depths of about 4 feet and below, the percentage of ash and waste materials started to increase significantly. So again, that was at 4 feet, and then depths much lower. So from those initial borings, the town took 2 actions. Weston and Sampson recommended that we do a second round of samples to really give ourselves a better sense of what does that topsoil that's free of debris, what's that measurement look like across the site? And they also recommended that we include in that second round sampling under the playground to be extra conservative in that area. So we did do that. We did a second round of samples, which I'll get to. But the second thing we did was that we modified the entire park design. We recognized that there was ash and waste visibly present in those borings. This was not unexpected from the history of the site. It's what one would assume we would find. And so DPW and Park and Recreation worked with Weston and Sampson to modify the design. So there would be no longer any digging below that topsoil and making sure that we weren't going into the waste materials. And also the debris design included mitigation strategies. So putting down a geotextile barrier to formally cap the site and then building up with additional fill on top. It's a proven mitigation strategy used on a lot of similar sites. So those were the actions taken from the first round of soil borings. In spring of 2022, Weston and Sampson came back to us with the results of the second set of soil samples. Under the playground, we found that there were shards of debris that were visible at depths 4 to 7 inches. We did not have a comfort level with that little of a buffer. And so I think within days, we had removed the playground structure entirely. DPW also brought new fill on site and reseeded that area and put a temporary fence around it. This other set of results from that second sample was that there was consistently 10 to 12 inches of typical topsoil that was free of debris across the rest of the field areas. And so in our discussions, we said the likelihood of contact with that material was quite low on those fields because you'd have to get pretty much a full foot down. So the fields at that time remained open and were used since then. At that point, the town also had a further discussion with Weston and Sampson about should we do any additional testing. And at that point, we were talking about going from visually observing kind of the composition of the soil to chemical testing. So getting a sense of what is the actual makeup of that soil. And I made the recommendation that we not go to that chemical testing at that point. The decision was really based on 4 key things in that discussion. The first was that we had that 10 to 12 inches consistently across the field before getting into any waste. The second was Weston and Sampson gave us a sense of the materials that you would find at a former burn dump. Do they produce gases, landfill gases? And the answer was very likely not. The third was that it was very unlikely with this type of site that any of the waste would migrate up. And the last real consideration was, again, that we had already changed the design. So we were already moving forward on a path, acknowledging that whether we knew exactly what was in the ash of the waste, we were mitigating for it regardless. We were building that into our construction plans from that point forward. Then we get to summer of 22. We had a contractor on a completely unrelated DPW water main project that had requested lay down space, and the town approved them to use a portion of Claxton for that project. And the contractor excavated an amount of soil on their lay down space to, well, I won't speak for them, but to make it a cleaner space for them. And they piled some soil to the side. That prompted a complaint and a concern from a resident to the Board of Health, concerned about why there was excavation and why there was a pile of soil on site. The Board of Health, with our Director of Health and Human Services and Public Works, re-engaged Weston and Sampson and said, could you identify mitigation strategies for that contractor to take, given that this is now out on site? There was a robust list. The contractor has done all of the immediate mitigation that was requested of them, and there's a few remaining items that they would do when they leave the site and before they return it back to the town. So from that point, the focus on Claxton really was to move forward with the funding request for construction. And so a request was submitted in the FY24 budget process. The town got contacted in December by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. And they expressed that they had received a complaint from a concerned resident about what was happening with the soil on Claxton Field. So the team here, we've met with DEP, as has Weston and Sampson, to talk through them to get a better understanding of what the concern was and what their expectations of the town were moving forward. The Massachusetts Contingency Plan is the regulatory framework under which kind of environmental response requirements are set for landlords. I want to be clear that right now there's nothing kind of from the first or second round of soil testing that has triggered the MCP. So we're not in that structure at this point. But from our conversations with DEP, they have taken the position that they do want us to do additional testing to get a sense of the chemical makeup of the soil. And their opinion is that they want us to test solely on the fact that it is a historical burn dump. So it's not that they saw something in particular in the first or the second round of soil testing, it's just by nature of the history of the site. They have asked us to test further. I'll conclude by saying that, you know, the town, we've done a lot of due diligence and we have a very good plan in place, including the mitigation already built into the design. Now, that being said, the DEP has asked us to test further, and so we are planning to do that. And if there need to be additional changes made based on that, then we will make those. But we have a plan and we think it's a good one. And then we'll see where the information leads us from there. So with that, I will turn it over to Karis about next steps.
Thank you. Right now we are working on solidifying a scope with Weston and Sampson Engineering to help us conduct borings on the site. We actually have been given approval by DEP for our sampling plan that was submitted last week. And they will be starting borings tomorrow in order to collect samples to be analyzed as part of this project. There are 4 different substances that they are testing for. 3 of the substances can be tested locally and should have results in a shorter time frame, 3 to 4 weeks. But one of the substances, dioxins, which the DEP has suggested that we should be testing for, is going to take a little bit longer to get results back on because the testing is not done in state, and there's only a few labs in the country that will test for these substances. So it will just take a little bit more time to process these. They will be testing 2 different parts of the site. So they'll be testing at several different locations, but they'll be testing the just below surface materials and looking at the composition of those materials. And then they'll be testing the part of the original site where the actual burn dump was. When we talked to DEP, we sort of played out what different scenarios could possibly result from the types of testing that they're doing. So if they don't find anything in that top layer of soil and they only find contaminants below that, it's likely that we will not have to close the Claxton site for current use, and that it will just influence our ability to do renovation, and it may influence our design. There are sort of 4 different scenarios that we could run into. We could run into a scenario where they test the topsoil and what's below and find nothing in the soil or nothing that's above reportable levels, in which case that actually may free up some of our design options, since now we would have the ability to do things like put in fencing, new lighting, things that would have required foundations and digging that we were not prepared to do when we were dealing with substances that we didn't know about. The second item is that they find some items above reporting levels underneath in the old burn dump area, but they don't find anything in the topsoil, in which case we would get into a reporting requirement with DEP, but we could continue to use the site as we are using it now. And then we would be working with DEP through our LSP at Weston and Sampson in order to make sure that we were doing everything possible to mitigate those materials, but those materials would remain on site and be capped. And essentially our original design with Claxton was assuming that scenario 2 was true, that we would have some item below the subsurface that would potentially be reportable and that we would need to cap the site. The third option is that they find something in the subsurface material that they find to be concerning and puts us in a different level of reporting, and at which case we may need to close Claxton for play until we can remediate the site. And the fourth scenario is that the contamination is so severe that they would mandate that we take the soil offsite. From what I have had conversations with DEP and Weston and Sampson, it's unlikely that we would be in that place. The DEP prefers that you manage materials on site and not remove materials because there are not many places to take materials to that would then cause a problem for another community. So those are the 4 possible scenarios that we have, and we'll have more information once we get test results back. I mentioned that the dioxin test results will be coming back later than the other items. Initially, when we had submitted our plan to DEP, we had not intended on testing for dioxins because based on history and prior dump sites that Weston and Sampson has dealt with, they did not believe that there was a high risk of us finding dioxins on site. So we should have some pretty good information coming out of that first round of testing before we get the follow-up testing. Right now, as indicated, we don't have the requirement of closing the field. There's nothing on site that has triggered any particular environmental concern. It's simply us validating what materials we have on site and then making an informed decision afterward. So we should have that information, and then we will be meeting with DEP and Weston and Sampson to figure out what level of reporting this particular site triggers. When we spoke with DEP, they indicated that they felt the burden was on the community in order to prove that we did not have a release of materials on this particular site. So while there was an acknowledgement that they don't have a particular regulatory authority right now on this site, they wanted us to prove that they didn't have any particular regulatory authority on this site. And in talking with Weston and Sampson, there's a lot of, once DEP gets involved, there's a lot of good reason to continue to comply with their requests and recommendations, which is what we have decided to do. So we're going to be starting, as I mentioned, doing the testing tomorrow, which should hopefully expedite some of these, help us expedite answering some of the questions that I'm sure that people will have, as it's hard to have some of this dialogue in a hypothetical conversation, which is sort of what we're doing today. I'll pass it on to Stacy, but we've been working at finding an alternative location if that 4th scenario or 3rd scenario does come up where the field does have to be closed.
Katie and Stacy, can I just interrupt for 1 second? I do just want to say, hopefully people do understand that the broad strokes of all this that's just been presented to you is in the packet that's available on the town website for the meeting. So if you feel like you missed something or you want to go back, that information in fact is available. And I also want to say, you know, the advice from Weston and Sampson and from DEP, there are a lot of burn sites that were used as dumps across the state. It was a very common practice. So this is something that the DEP has seen a lot of, and led to the town's initial decisions about design. And we do look forward to understanding the rest of the information. Stacy, thank you.
Thank you. So like Kara said, we are preparing for alternate options for our softball teams. So Parks and Forestry went to different sites around town to figure out what would be a viable space that is big enough for the high school teams in particular. We have narrowed it down, and in conversations with the athletic director, Dan Lee, we have tagged Broadmeadow and Avery as the alternate sites for the Claxton fields. Excuse me. Parks and Forestry are working on some improvements to both fields to get them player ready for the high school teams and the high school needs. So we'll be doing that in the next few weeks, provided weather situations, but those are what we're doing. And then as far as the user groups, we'll be relocating them to various fields around town as needed. But specifically for the high school teams, it'll be Broadmeadow and Avery. Thank you.
So I have a really easy job compared to my colleagues, which is to say that there will be health questions, but we don't know what those questions are until we get the test results back. Based on previous experience, both from DEP and from Weston and Sampson, Katie made 2 points that I just reinforce. It is incredibly unlikely that any materials would off-gas through soil. It is incredibly unlikely that any materials would migrate upwards through soil. So the typical uses that have occurred at a field, running, jumping, anything like that, is unlikely to have exposed anyone to any type of chemicals. Until we know more, there's not a lot of use in speculating, but I think those are two important pieces to keep in mind.
Okay, great. Thank you for the background. So as Katie indicated, our goal in this meeting is to just get everybody to the same level, be able to get any questions that people have now out on the table. And we'll answer what we can answer and keep track of what we don't know for going forward. So I'm going to open it up for questions. And we will open it to board members first, and then we will come back to public questions. Mr. Barali.
Thank you, and thank you for that concise presentation. We've been following this along, and I know we had a plan, like you said, and we actually had a contingency plan. And here we are where it's incredibly unlikely, as I hear now, that there is an issue, but of course, because of the complaint, we have to do our due diligence. My question is timeline as far as results of test back, because you talked about, I think 1 and 2 are the most likely scenarios. One where the topsoil is clean and then underneath it is contaminated, and then maybe some likelihood of, the topsoil be contaminated, but we already had an idea to cap that. But so that people can use the field, and we're going with the contingency plans, what is the timeline for actually getting the test back, having the DEP look at it, sign off and say, you know what, there is no contamination, you're clear to play on these fields?
So right now, we're hoping to get the results by the end of February, the preliminary results for Weston and Sampson to provide us information. They'll obviously want a little bit of time to be able to digest that information and provide us recommendations. So they're committing to provide us a formal, sort of an informal communication at the end of February, maybe early March, and then a formal communication at the end of March. This is on all the items except for dioxins, which may take a little bit longer.
Sure.
So we should have some information by that period of time. I don't believe DEP is the one who clears us. It's the LSP working for Weston and Sampson who will determine, who will evaluate the information, see if we've gone over the allowable thresholds for any of these materials, and then tell us what level of reporting that then puts us in. So we should have that information by mid to end of March. I think the concern is that the spring season is very close to that time frame, and so we wanted to make sure that fields were ready, even if we got the best possible news and found out that there was no contamination at all. So that way we would be able to pivot very quickly, which is why we're preparing the other 2 fields for the ability to play at the high school level.
And so, Madam Chair, can we prep this field? I know we've closed it to the public. Can we prep these fields just in case we get the best results? Is that the plan right now, or are we staying off it as far as our parks and forestry are concerned?
So I think maybe I can answer the question. As far as I'm aware, the fields are not closed to the public. We don't have a reason at this time to close them to the public. We're simply providing an alternative location. I know sometimes it's hard for user groups to pivot from one location to the other in the middle of a season. And because we won't be able to give clarity in advance, we have to, my staff has to pretend that these fields may be offline. So that way we can spend the time to get them ready for softball should the Claxton fields be unavailable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We'll just step in and say that the fields are closed for winter season. So they're not currently open, but it is specifically seasonal.
Thank you.
Josh.
Finance Committee. So it sounds like the current level of testing is beyond what was originally envisioned at the start for the design funds of the Claxton redesign. What funds are currently being used to fund that testing? And is there a need for additional funds to thoroughly do that?
So I'll give my part of it and then I'll hand it over to Tim. So the contractor who disturbed the soils on site will be responsible for all the testing related to the soils that they disturb, which is a portion of the cost. And then Tim.
So a couple of years ago, town meeting approved a financial warrant article that the Board of Health requested for essentially scientific expertise. We sort of put forth a scenario where we wouldn't have the expertise in-house and we would need to bring in outside expertise. There's $50,000 in that warrant article, and we intend to use, at least based on the quote that we got today, pretty much all of it for this round of testing.
Other questions? Peter?
So is it possible that we'll have test results in time and come to that scenario, which would be, I guess, scenario 2, which is what you based your CPC application on, and which would allow you to go forward with the full presentation of the article presently before CPC, based on the actual design that you've described in that application?
I think it's unlikely that we will have test results to be able to go forward with our presentation to CPC. If we get results back, again, it'll be after your process, unfortunately. I think we would like to see if it's possible to keep the project as a potential option for the fall or the following year. So I think the project is still very much trying to stay on its initial timeline, and we'll try to figure out what's the best method to keep the project on schedule. So is it trying to make a request, again, depending on the results that we get, making a request to potentially entertain an application in the fall? Or is it a scenario like we are planning on doing with McLeod, where we would simply bid the project before town meeting and not be able to award it until after town meeting the following year?
Thank you.
So it's still not clear yet. Other questions from boards and committees? Okay, if there are questions from the public, there is a microphone that's in the center if you would like to come up and ask a question. And you can come on up and give your name.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Magna. I'm the varsity softball coach. I know that when I heard this news, myself and Danley had a couple conversations about this, as well as my team and a lot of the players. And Dan and I had talked about how Memorial, the turf field, was an option for us to play at. And so I just wanted to bring that to the table and see if that was a possibility. And more so, would it be possible to get a fence there if that was possible? Obviously temporary. We know that it's a multi-use field and lacrosse plays there and rugby and other sports. And then that was one thing. And then we talked about the Avery field and the size of that field and the potential dangers that it could be for our JVs to be playing there. The length of the field, we do have some powerful hitters down there, and they could potentially be hitting into the streets or hitting pedestrians walking on the sidewalk. So things like that. So we were just wondering what options. I mean, we've talked about a bunch of options that field wise in the town that we've thought about. And I don't know if this is the right time to share all that or what you're, what, yes.
So
Yeah.
Stacy, I was going to say, does Stacy want to offer any feedback to the field's questions?
So if this is not the right moment, we can certainly talk offline and have those conversations. We'd be willing to entertain some other options, certainly. So I'm happy to set up a meeting if that's more conducive than having that conversation right now.
Okay.
Whatever's easier.
Okay,
Great.
we can explore. Any other questions other than the fields? Okay. Other questions?
I'm Holly Clark. I live on Central Avenue. And my question is about the piles of soil, contaminated or not, that are present right now, that the contractor created these very large piles. And one of the strategies that was recommended was covering them for the time being until we decided what we needed to do. So they're not all covered right now. Like as I came here tonight, part of the plastic that's on top of it has blown off. So whose responsibility is it to make sure what we're doing right now, we're actually doing? And I'm not, we have weather, like we had a really bad storm, so part of it came off, but it is off. And so the second question would be, this is where the playground was. And my understanding is that the playground area, unlike the fields, the contamination was found very close to the surface, like 4 inches below. In fact, at the Park and Rec meeting, a question had been asked, what could be done over there? And the engineers were saying, we'd have to build up, like we couldn't put anything there. We couldn't, we had just talked about doing tennis courts. So you think that's really impervious. Could we put it over there? And they said, no, because you have to put a fence around it. Like they really did not want any substantial digging going on. And now where the contractor pulled up is where the contamination was really close to the surface. So first, whose job is to make sure that covering is there? And secondly, are we thinking about what to do on the playground side of it? Like, even if the fields are okay, what are we going to do over there?
Okay, thank you, Holly. I'm going to turn it over to Katie and maybe Karis. But
Yes, the first question was about enforcement on the site, and please do contact us if you see anything. We had gone out on site after the initial mitigation strategies and had confirmed that everything had been in place, but if something changes, please do reach out. And Department of Public Works, it's changed. I noted it now. You don't need to reach out again. But if it were to happen in the future, we're in regular communication with that contractor. Yeah. The question around what we found in the playground area, I'd actually like to see if Prasanta could answer that.
I would suggest Lee to answer that question because Lee knows the detail.
Absolutely. In our initial assessment prior to the contractor's activities, we did a series of shallow borings throughout that area. And what we found was that beneath the existing either mulch or sand, there was a sandbox there. It was below those materials, and then a fabric liner was where we started to get into the waste. So the recommendation from our end was really an abundance of caution based on the use of that area. With a sandbox and the potential for kids to be digging down, if they managed to get through the fabric liner, they could run into some of the glass or other debris there. So at that point was when we gave the recommendation to consider closing the playgrounds, just because it's a slightly different use scenario than the rest of the field. Following the contractor's work and stripping off some of the topsoil materials there, we went out a second time. I was actually the one on site, took a look at the stockpile. What we found was that there were a number of stockpiles there. Only one of them was this stockpile topsoil material. In looking at it, there was no visible ash in that material. What we saw was small amounts of glass or other debris, less than 1% by volume, small amounts of it, both within that stockpile and then in certain locations just within the laydown area. So after that was when we gave our recommendations on covering the stockpile and generally restricting access until that material could be returned. And then as an additional conservative measure, putting 6 inches minimum of additional soil on top of that, just to further restrict any potential access to the glass or other debris components. One thing though that I do want to reiterate and highlight is in the material that we saw both at the surface and in the stockpile, we were talking small quantities of glass and other debris and no visible ash or, really concentrated burn dump, if you will, waste materials.
So Lee, you want to say then that the topsoil is likely to be clean? Even though we do not have the data, based on the field observation, topsoil appeared to be clean.
Thank you, Prashanta, for mentioning that. Prashanta is absolutely right. At this point, with the absence of ash or other materials, we don't have a real reason to believe that that material is overtly contaminated. That being said, part of our sampling plan does include collecting a sample from that stockpile, as well as advancing an additional boring within the laydown area to further characterize, both the stockpile materials and whatever is still in the ground there. So that is part of the sampling that will be ongoing starting up tomorrow.
Madam Chair?
Thank you, Lee.
Just to follow up on the speaker's question or comment that site may not be able to be used in the future. I'm assuming it's too early to make that determination because I know it is one of the sites that we're looking at the active use committee that we are on. So I'm assuming at this time it's too early to take that off the table as a site until more due diligence is done. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Thank you.
And not being used for the future depends on the type of use and whether excavation would be required. Yeah. Okay. There was a gentleman who came up from the back and then I think he went back to the back of the room. I just want to confirm that he does not have a question. You reserve the right to come back. Okay. Next gentleman then.
Hi, I'm Steve Doroyan. I'm with the Needham baseball and softball program. So this dramatically impacts our program to lose both of our two of our 4 town softball fields is not easy. So just hopeful that the testing comes back as we anticipate. That said, just for clarity, can you just explain the 0.3 or the third level of, you said 1 and 2 are sort of like, we can keep playing. 3 was, we might find something. If we find something there, we may not be able to keep playing or we may be able to. Can you just give a little bit of clarity around, like, if you know, and I understand if you don't know, but.
I can give you my layman's. And
I'm a
then,
layman, it's not gonna be-
Prashanta
don't go too deep.
can provide any backup, but it has to do with the reporting requirements that we have with DEP, depending on the level of the contamination and the location of the contamination. So if the contamination, they find it in the topsoil, they believe that there's a way that the person playing on that field, the way you would normally play on a field like that, could potentially be exposed to it, they would require us to erect a fence around the entire site in order to close it until we can mitigate that circumstance.
Gotcha.
It's possible in that case that the plan that we had in place of capping the original field and maybe not reusing the topsoil, but maybe capping the topsoil and bringing in additional soil on top may be a solution to that. So it would really be the renovation would be the solution if that were the case.
Sorry, so the third level is, we're not using that field this year.
Correct. If they
Okay.
find material that they think that kids could be exposed to or people could be exposed to in that topsoil, that the field would not be able to be used.
And
that
that's
year.
the first 12 inches.
Yes.
Okay. And then I know you probably don't know because you said a couple times the dioxin take test would take a little bit longer. And I understand, but a little bit longer to me is like potentially my whole season for 250 girls. So I just want to understand, is like a little bit longer, like a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, like what is expected?
So until we get a positive result, we don't trigger any need to close the site. So if we are taking longer to get results, we would continue operating the site as we've been operating it before and have it available. It's only when we get positive results back that we would have to have a conversation about what that means for the site. So I think we are preparing alternative locations, particularly for the high school teams as
Of
well.
course, yeah.
Because we don't know when that information will come, and we want to be prepared for the absolute worst case scenario, even though we don't believe that that's what we're going to end up with.
Sure.
So the longer those results take, it should not impact your season until we may have to potentially pivot to a secondary location. I think we wanted to offer people the ability to go to another location so that they didn't have to pivot in the middle of a season, knowing that could also be disruptive.
So the goal is for your teams to have a full season in another location in town.
Okay. We got a lot of kids in the town that play baseball and softball, so
I
just
got it.
having been involved for quite a while, that's likely, well, we can have a season. It won't be like other seasons. We'd have to dramatically decrease the amount of games and practices the kids are allowed to have because there's just too many teams, which is a good problem, right? But those two fields coming off is not insignificant for our program. So back to my question around days, weeks, or months, do we have any, a little bit longer isn't really clear to me. So if you don't know what a little bit longer kind of seems like, because is it fair to say that, like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, these fields are offline pending these, like, I guess this is where I'm kind of confused. Are they, because they're closed now because it's cold, but it won't be cold soon.
So they are closed right now for the winter, as are
Yeah.
all of our fields. But I think if we're going to have a meeting that Stacy suggested, based on revisiting locations, we can talk about the timing. I think the field is not closed because of any environmental issue. Our thought was that providing you a space immediately separate from Claxton would give you stability. But if we hear back from you that you want to stay on Claxton as long as you can, and then have to pivot very quickly if need be, I think we can add that to the agenda for the meeting.
Yeah, that's great. I would love, yeah, that would be fabulous. And yeah, it's more about, again, there isn't enough, unless we rent space in Dedham or Newton or something like that, which we don't, I guess we could look into, but, and we maybe start to, but there aren't enough fields for our current program. So it's going to be hard to figure out a space that would work. You know, it's not like soccer or frisbee where you could just play in open grass, right? Like you need a diamond. So, okay, cool. And then, I guess the last question I had was about the renovations, which we're super excited about, and hopefully those go through. Just understanding the timing, I didn't quite understand the timing of the testing and the CPC. So maybe it's just the CPC meeting is soon, and we won't. You said, Karis, that we wouldn't have testing back. I just want to understand the timing.
So our original intention for McLeod and Claxton was to seek funding in 1 year and then execute the project over 2 years, starting with McLeod, constructing that this summer to be available the following year to then take Claxton offline. We don't have to seek funding for Claxton this year in order to stick to that schedule, because we would not be putting that project out to bid until the winter of 2025. So there are some opportunities there to either see if we could revisit the application at an off cycle, which is at the discretion of the Community Preservation Committee, or we could go for the following town meeting and do a bid in advance of town meeting and then award it afterward, knowing that the field wouldn't be coming online until the following year as well. So I think there's still significant opportunities for us to keep this project on schedule,
Okay.
even with this potential disruption.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I think
If I could just add to that, just clarity for everyone also, that what's happening at Claxton is not going to impact the timeline for McLeod at all. So that is on track to go forward to May town meeting.
if this wasn't inappropriate, I'd give you a hug. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a hand up on Zoom that I see. Joanne McHugh.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to make a request. When you consider alternate fields, can you also consider parking? I know it's very difficult, the parking at Avery right now, even when you're just going to a practice. I think it would be really hard to host a high school game there. And then, you know, also a layperson, is there an opportunity to, and I know we don't have enough baseball fields either, but is there an opportunity to modify any of the baseball diamonds to support the high school girls?
I can answer that. So most of the softball infields require skins. And many, if not all of our baseball diamonds have grass. So there'd be significant maintenance and renovations needed to convert one of those fields. In addition to a lot of our baseball diamonds have mounds, which softball diamonds do not. So it's not that it's off the table. It would just take considerable amount of renovation time and money to do that.
Yep. Thank you.
Joanne. Yes, you're back. Welcome.
I'm Eric Goldstein, and I represent the MSSL, which is a league that we, in Needham, we have 4 men's teams softball. And we play on Sunday mornings. And sometimes we have 2 games going on Sunday mornings, and sometimes we have 1 game. And we've been playing in Claxton for, I don't know, a long time. And the same issue that Steph had about the size of the fields, I don't think Broadmeadow or Waverly, was the other one? Avery would be large enough. And then there's a parking issue as well. So I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse, but I want to let everybody know that there's lots of people out here that need the use of a good size softball field. So maybe we'll be in that meeting when you have the meeting with the high school. We'd like to be involved. Stacy.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, awesome.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm the captain of the softball team for the 2023 season. And these are some of my teammates who are juniors. And we kind of just wanted to talk about why we think Memorial Field, making the turf field into our home field for the season, would be the best idea, I guess. And basically the first reason, I think one thing that's really important to me is being a senior, I missed out on my freshman season. So it would really be nice to have a really great senior season to kind of make up for that. And also, we don't have a storage bin at the moment to carry our stuff from the high school to wherever our field is. So it goes in our cars, which is a lot to carry, which is fine, but it would be a lot easier to just carry it down from the high school to the fields or store it at the fields, just for convenience and being efficient, getting to practices, getting to games. Also, the turf field is really easy.
Amanda, can you try to speak into the microphone just a little bit better? That would be great.
Okay. A turf field is really easy to take care of because there's no rainouts usually. When it comes to a dirt field, we rake it before practices, before games to make sure it's in good playing condition. And again, with rain, it's hard to play on a dirt field because the field has to be in good condition to play on it, not to ruin it. So a turf field, again, is really easy to prevent rainouts and to keep our season on time.
Something else that would make Memorial a lot easier of a field for us to play on is the transportation. Most of the varsity players can drive. However, JV, a lot of them are underclassmen and rely on rides from varsity players. And those rides really help build our softball community. And also at Avery Field, it's on a busy street, so there's not a lot of parking for us, and especially for away game or home games. When teams come to us, there's no space for a bus to park.
Also, something about Memorial is that it has lights, which neither Broadmeadow or Avery does, and the lights are necessary for our season for nights like senior night, which is really important, and like the youth nights that we have in our season. So it's really important to be able to play with the lights, or even for practice, if it's ever like dark out, we're gonna need the lights in order to play.
I'm Maddie, and another thing I think is important, it's not like a literal thing, but like Claxton is kind of like away from the rest of the town and really far from the high school. And so no one really comes to our games So I think having it be at the high school would be a really fun way to like incorporate it into the town, because it's kind of at a central location and it's right down the hill from the high school. So people like after going to school or like hanging out with friends, they can just walk to the high school and come watch like baseball or football or lacrosse, like all the other sports. And like when we're done with our practice or games, we can go see others play. And I think it would just create like a better environment.
Thank you, ladies. I see I have another hand up online. Richard Sucher.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So just to piggyback off a question that was asked earlier regarding financing, knowing all the kind of various options that have been discussed for the high school season and knowing the timing, how prepared is the town financially to back up whatever needs to be done to get whatever locations are chosen to support the high school program this season? How are the financial resources to do that? Because I know any of the sites are going to take a significant outlay to get them game ready. It's not something that you can necessarily patchwork a field together when you have, the caliber of athletes that are at particularly the varsity games coming in. And I'm just, that wondering where that financial outlay is going to come from and how confident the programs can be that money is going to be available and the effort's going to be available to get it ready in essentially what is a month until that starts.
Karis?
In our preliminary conversations that we have had with the high school athletics, we did discuss Broad Meadow as an option for varsity in particular. And we have received a quote from a vendor that DPW can cover the cost to convert that field into a varsity level field on a temporary basis. We'd have to evaluate and work with Park and Rec to look at any other potential options and what would be the cost in order to make those conversions. But we are in conversations with a vendor who is able to help us convert many of our fields. If we need to, we just need to figure out what the timeline and cost would be for that. So I think we will need to have these conversations relatively quickly in order to establish what direction we're going in to make sure that we're investing it in the correct location.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Andrew Pittman, and I've been involved in the softball community for a number of years. Both my daughters have played for growing up and so forth. And it's really been a great thing through many years, especially through COVID. Baseball and softball was a place where we saw a huge influx of kids participating in because it was something they could do. And as parents and coaches, it was such a wonderful opportunity to be, working from home or working in a weird environment and to come home and to coach these kids and to see them outside. And it's been great. So the softball community is really growing. And I think that the conversations that are on the table now, the improvement of these fields is really a wonderful thing. And I really commend the town that they're taking the efforts to upgrade these fields. And like others have said, we don't have a lot of fields. We have Claxton, which is 2 of our 4 fields, but I don't know if people realize when there's a car wash, that's the permit for the field. We don't get to use the fields for practices. And the other thing is what the girls said from the varsity team, having the opportunity to play at Memorial would be a really awesome experience for them, because they have always had to go down to Claxton. That field is there. That field was built, I think, as part of the Field of Dreams or whenever that was created in Memorial, and not one game has ever been played on that softball field. So I hope that's considered. And I'm also cautiously optimistic. I'm sort of in my head, I'm hearing this quote from, I think, Dumb and Dumber, when Jim Carrey is trying to date this girl, and she says, there's no chance. And he says, so you think there's a chance? And what I'm curious is some of the discussions from previous town meetings, when there was this goal of really renovating Claxton to make it something that was in par with our neighboring towns like Wellesley and Franklin and Milton and what they've done. If these samples come back and they're clean, does it mean we get to shift back to the original renovation project? Are those funds still there to do the upgrades to the lighting? I think you sort of touched on it, but dugouts, fences, something that maybe after the recent work from Weston and Sampson was maybe shelved because of the concern. So that's my question.
Katie, do you want to respond, or do you want me to start, or?
Yeah, well, you can always start, but I'm happy to.
Well, what I would say is that the town is committed to renovating Claxton. And if it were to be option 4 that comes back, that requires that we cart all the soil from the site off-site and rebuild that entire field, then we're having a different discussion, because that's going to be a very expensive proposition. But with options 1, 2, or 3, those are all sort of in line with our expectations with what we need to fund to renovate that site. So the timeline may have some implications if it were option 3 and there's some other reporting requirements and things that come into play. But the amount of funding that will be required is still in the town's plan. Now you can tell me if I got it right.
I would just add that I think Andrew was getting at also, what if the results came back at level 1, which is everything's clean, and built-in mitigation that you have in your second design, can we take that off the table? So I think the response to that is we'd have to reconvene the stakeholders, and that would obviously be a decision we'd have to make, and it may impact the timeline of the project. So there's trade-offs always, but it would put it back on the table.
But our goal will be to get to renovated softball fields as expeditiously as we can. That's what we're all trying to figure out how to do.
Yeah, and I will say,
and as safely, I want to also be clear.
Yes, and I will say the softball community is very strong, and I've had meetings with a number of folks. I know everyone else here has as well, and it's been very clear that we need more softball fields, and we need them at a higher standard. And the goal of coming out with McLeod and Claxton remains. It's just the path there is a little bit different than we anticipated.
Thank you. Other questions? It looks like there's something else online. Oh, I see Dan Lee has his hand up online.
Hey, folks. I just wanted to weigh in a little bit about the proposition of playing at Memorial. And when this issue arose and I was brought into the loop a couple weeks ago, in the past couple of years, there hadn't been a desire to play games on the turf at Memorial. So that's why I was working with Stacy and Ed on different options that presented, proper distances to be able to play high school games. But I just want to say that the turf is 100% an option. It just will be a little bit more tricky to schedule games around other sports that we have going on. As Coach Magnai said, it's a multi-purpose field, and it wouldn't be safe to have games going on with lacrosse games going on and balls flying every which way. But the playing on the turf is a viable option. It will just be a big jigsaw puzzle, but that's what we do to make all of our sports work. So just wanted to add in that if that's the path that we want to go down, that's something I'll work with Stacy and Ed to make work.
Thank you, Dan. Other questions?
One clarifying question.
Absolutely.
So I understand that the DEP has their own reasons for wanting to do the testing based upon the past use as a burn site. And I also heard that after the winter season, the fields at Claxton will remain open unless there's a result from the soil sampling that dictates otherwise. So I'm wondering, for the time being, before we have those soil sample results, are we operating under the assumption that there is some sort of hazard at Claxton, or that there is not?
I would say we're operating under the assumption there is not, but let me turn it to Karis.
So I think we're operating under the assumption that the material below the topsoil will probably trigger a reportable event with levels that are higher than what are the minimums. But we believe that that topsoil is what is in that material, and that topsoil is deep enough that there's no exposure potential for for anyone who's playing on the field. And when we talked with the LSP, I think they equated it to, if you asked me today if it was safer to drive on 128 or to play a softball game on Claxton Field, he would tell you it's safer to play a game on Claxton Field. So it comes back to risk analysis. And I think for our perspective, we have no reason to believe that there's anything wrong with that topsoil area based on the work that we have done earlier on this field. So there's no reason to believe now than there was 6 months ago that anything has changed, other than we're simply being asked to test the material.
Any further questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to put a mark on this, but with Broad Meadow, which is now a AA field or AAA Little League field, upgraded, is anyone just keeping an eye out for like Little League? What's now that field, Broad Meadow, will be out of the circuit? So they included, Stacey?
So not necessarily. The high school has access to all of our town fields up until 6 p.m. So typically our youth programs don't get on until after the high school teams. So that would remain the same.
Yeah, but it would be constructed differently. The distance from home to first is X number of yards.
So it would be constructed certainly, but it still would be malleable to youth sports or youth baseball if necessary. But if Claxton is offline, then youth softball also has to move.
Yep.
So my thoughts would be that the youth softball would move there as well, to work with their group, and then we would move baseball somewhere else.
Okay, so it moves down here. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Hi, I'm Melissa. Oh, Lord. I'm Melissa. I'm involved with Needham baseball, softball. This is more of a comment rather than a question, but if I think anything has come to light over this not great issue, is that we need more fields and multi-purpose spaces in this town. And as the town keeps growing and we keep allowing more buildings to be built in and have more families come to this wonderful town, we're busting at the seams with places for families, adults, children, everybody who likes to participate in outdoor sports. So we work together with what we have as far as softball, Needham baseball, lacrosse, football, the adult program. But I think if nothing else can be taken away from this, at least we realize we need more outdoor space for everybody.
Thank you. We do have an active sports task force going right now, having recognized that as a challenge to understand what other options we have. So we agree, there's lots of people who would like to participate on lots of fields. Yes. Sure, please do.
Hi, so we do have the Active Recreation Assets Working Group working right now. Unfortunately, you've missed our first public meeting where we were gathering public comment, but you can certainly still email. And I'm going to give you the email address right now because we're definitely accepting comments and assessing where all of these amenities need to go. So that email is otm@needhamma.gov. And if you'll send in your comments, you'll be just in time for our next meeting.
Any other questions or comments tonight?
Madam Chair, just, I guess in closing, 'cause it seems like there aren't any more, and of course, you'll have the final closing, but I do want to thank everyone for coming out. We've heard some information, I think, that was conflicting about the Claxton Field, and I think that from what I'm gathering tonight, and I just want to be clear, it is open, obviously because of the winter it's not open. There is a probability, if not a high probability, that these tests might come back and say, this field can remain open because unless we get a positive test, that would cause it to close down. And what we're looking at right now, really alternate sites in case we have to close it down, or if there's some discussion that the teams don't want to play on this field. And I think also what I heard is kind of that silver lining, and it was discussed by one speaker, is that maybe because we were assuming in our original plan that we're going to build this up right another foot. We can't put the lights below the surface because of the possible contamination. But now if we get tests that, trying to be the optimist here, are positive, or I guess negative, then we would be able to maybe redesign it as long as it's in a timely manner to have what the original project was supposed to be. So if I've missed anything, please let me know. But I think this has been very informative because I got a lot, some emails and calls about Claxton's closed and what's the next step. And this has really been pretty enlightening. So thank you. And thank you to the members of the public. Hopefully at the end of the day, this is just it's been an expensive detour and costs a lot of time. And that's unfortunate, but hopefully at the end of the day, everything works out and we're able to play on this field. And again, I think it did open our eyes to that we need other fields and alternate fields for potential growth. So thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So if there's no further questions, the one other comment that I want to make is that it would be the intent of the select board and the town manager that we would gather this group back together at the point when we have results from testing, because we're not 100% clear of exactly that timing. We're not going to book a night tonight, but we will be back in touch with everybody here. And again, we'll let the public know when we do have those results available so that they can be reviewed. And then we'll talk through next steps and timelines again, based on the actual information that we receive. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. If there are questions, selectboard@needhamma.gov works. By all means, feel free to reach out and we will continue to work on this together. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.